By the spring of 1941, the Atlantic was a chessboard of war, with Britain's lifelines running across its icy waters. At the heart of Germany's ambitious plan to strangle those lifelines lay the Bismarck, a colossal battleship bristling with massive 15-inch guns, and her companion, the heavy cruiser Prinz Eugene. Newly commissioned and polished to perfection, Bismarck represented the pinnacle of Nazi naval engineering, a floating fortress designed to command respect, fear, and deadly efficiency. As night fell on May 18, 1941, the two ships slipped quietly out of Gotenhofen. Under the cloak of darkness, the Baltic air was crisp, filled with the scent of diesel and sea spray. The crews, a mix of seasoned sailors and newly trained gunners, whispered prayers and superstitions, knowing that the coming weeks would test them beyond anything imaginable. But secrecy, like all human endeavors, has its limits. Neutral Swedish observers, watching from distant fjords and coastline outposts, noted the movements of the German ships. Aircraft glimpsed masts and funnels cutting across twilight skies, and silent reports traveled along diplomatic channels, reaching the eyes and ears of British intelligence. By the time Bismarck reached the Norwegian coast, reconnaissance Spitfires were already photographing her. The British knew a storm was brewing, and it would be one that could either cement German dominance or shatter it utterly. Every course plotted, every order whispered through the corridors of command, carried consequences, not just for the sailors on deck, but for the entire course of the war. The danger was clear. If Bismarck reached the Atlantic unchallenged, Britain's convoys, its food, weapons, and lifeblood, would be vulnerable. And yet, as the German ships sailed north on May 22nd toward the Denmark Strait, a sense of inevitability hung over the officers and men. Somewhere ahead, destiny waited. Please click subscribe and like the video. It helps more people discover this story. The British response was swift and absolute. Admiral John Tovey ordered the home fleet into the frigid North Atlantic, setting a deadly trap. HMS Hood, pride of the Royal Navy, and the brand-new battleship Prince of Wales were dispatched to intercept, while cruisers and smaller vessels shadowed the expected path. Every signal intercepted, every observation recorded, painted a picture of a monster of war moving toward open ocean. The Bismarck's very existence demanded confrontation, and Britain would not allow hesitation. On May 23rd, the first direct sightings occurred. HMS Suffolk and HMS Norfolk, British cruisers adept at reconnaissance, spotted the German ships near Greenland. Distance could not conceal them. The sheer size of Bismarck, her massive hull cutting through the waves, was unmistakable. Shadowing commenced. Every movement was reported, every change in course calculated. The game of cat and mouse had begun, and for the men aboard both sides, the stakes could not have been higher. As the ships edged closer to the Atlantic, tensions aboard the German vessels ran high. The officers understood that their mission, if successful, would be remembered as one of the greatest naval feats in history. But failure was catastrophic. Every sailor braced for the unknown. Storms at sea, enemy fire, mechanical failure, and the cold that gnawed through clothes and bone alike. And then a shadow fell across the horizon, an unidentified vessel that might have been a recon plane or patrol ship. No one spoke. The silence was louder than any alarm. Something was coming, something that might change everything. The crews had little time to dwell on fear. By the morning of May 24th, Bismarck and Prinz Eugene had entered the Denmark Strait, the narrow channel between Greenland and Iceland. Here, the Atlantic opened before them like a promisor, a trap. British ships were already moving to intercept. The tension on board the German vessels was electric. Officers adjusted their binoculars, sailors tightened their boots, and the gunners checked ammunition once more. Every heartbeat echoed the same question. Would they survive the first clash? Radar screens flickered, flags snapped in icy winds, and distant silhouettes emerged through fog and spray. The first shots might come at any moment, and yet the Bismarck moved with deadly grace, her massive guns trained for the first time on a target that might dare challenge her. Somewhere in the mist, the Royal Navy was closing the net, unaware of just how fast this behemoth could turn the tide of war, or how swiftly it could meet disaster. At dawn on May 24th, the gray Atlantic waters were eerily calm, as if nature itself paused to witness what was about to unfold. HMS Hood and HMS Prince of Wales closed in, their silhouettes cutting through the mist like predators. Admiral Lancelot Holland, aboard the Hood, felt the weight of history pressing upon him. This was not merely a battle, it was a defining moment for Britain, a test of courage, judgment, and resolve. The first shells of the day splashed against the Atlantic, sending geysers of seawater into the air. Bismarck's guns, trained but restrained, remained silent at first. A study in deadly patience, but silence can only last so long. Captain Ernst Lindemann, keenly aware of the stakes, took decisive action. The order was simple, precise, and merciless. Open fire. The great guns of Bismarck roared, belching smoke and flame, shattering the calm morning. A moment later, catastrophe struck with the force of inevitability. One massive shell from Bismarck slammed into Hood, striking a magazine. A towering inferno erupted. Sailors were thrown into the sea, steel twisted. The proud battlecruiser vanished into the abyss in a matter of seconds. The roar of the guns was drowned by screams and silence alike. Over 1,400 men were lost heroes, sons, husbands, all swallowed by fire and water. Only 3 survived to tell the tale. The shock reverberated across the Atlantic. Britain's flagship, its pride and morale, was gone. Fury, grief, and disbelief swept through the Royal Navy. And yet, the battle was not over. HMS Prince of Wales, though newly commissioned and untested, continued to fight. Her guns faltered, her machinery complained, but she pressed on, landing critical hits on Bismarck, rupturing fuel lines and flooding a boiler room. Though smaller in effect than the loss of Hood, these wounds would ultimately seal the German battleship's fate. The battle lasted barely 15 minutes, yet in that fleeting quarter of an hour, the rules of the game shifted. Bismarck had survived, but she was no longer invincible. Damage control teams worked frantically, sailors scurried to plug leaks, and engineers prayed that the engines would hold. The Atlantic was a silent witness to a wounded giant, limping through waters that once promised dominance, but now hinted at impending doom. As Bismarck turned westward into the open ocean, she was tracked relentlessly. British cruisers maintained visual contact, radioing coordinates, plotting intercepts. Every maneuver was calculated, every course change a gamble. The hunt had begun in earnest, and the Atlantic became a theater of suspense and tension, where a single misstep could cost thousands of lives. Somewhere ahead, reinforcements would arrive, and behind, the shadow of revenge loomed. Night fell, but the danger did not cease. Bismarck's crew labored under exhausted vigilance, aware that dawn might bring torpedoes, shells, or reconnaissance planes. And then, in the gloom, a distant thrum rose, the unmistakable sound of engines not their own. The first enemy aircraft were approaching, their presence a reminder that the German battleship was not alone in her voyage. The sky itself had become a battlefield. Communication crackled across channels. Orders were shouted. Gunners manned their stations, eyes straining in darkness. Every lookout was a sentinel, every decision a potential matter of life and death. Somewhere, a pilot from the Royal Air Force scanned the horizon for a target that might not survive long enough to reach the French coast. The stage was set for a deadly encounter that would determine the fate of men and machines alike. And just when hope seemed to flicker faintly aboard Bismarck, news arrived through the ether. British forces had been reinforced. Battleships were converging. Aircraft carriers were deploying torpedo bombers. The net was tightening. For the first time, even the mighty Bismarck felt the unrelenting pressure of a foe that refused to yield. She was powerful, yes, but she was not untouchable. And in the Atlantic, a single torpedo, a lucky shell, or a navigational error could spell the end. The damage from the Denmark Strait engagement left Bismarck limping but alive. Fuel leaked into the icy Atlantic, leaving a dark, oily trail visible to anyone searching from the air or sea. The German command faced a grim choice: press on toward the Atlantic convoy lanes, risking destruction with every mile, or retreat to the safety of France, slipping past the relentless British hunt. Admiral stoic and unyielding chose the latter, charting a course for Brest friends. But Britain would not allow reprieve. The loss of HMS Hood had left a wound in the national psyche that demanded vengeance. Every ship capable of sailing, every aircraft that could fly, was mobilized. Battleships, cruisers, and carriers converged in a deadly net. A hunter's chorus across hundreds of miles of churning Atlantic, the Royal Navy's determination transformed the ocean into a theater of suspense, where even the mightiest battleship could be tracked, shadowed, and ultimately destroyed. Aircraft carriers now became the decisive factor in modern naval warfare. On the night of May 24th, HMS Victorious launched swordfish biplanes into darkness, their canvas wings straining against wind and rain. Anti-aircraft fire erupted from Bismarck, flak slicing the sky, and one torpedo hit glanced harmlessly along the hull. The strike had done more than physical damage. It forced Bismarck into evasive maneuvers that strained her engines and worsened her already critical fuel situation. Every turn, every course adjustment left a German ship more vulnerable, and the relentless shadow of the Royal Navy was closing in like a predator stalking prey. In the early hours of May 25th, a glimmer of hope appeared. Bismarck managed to slip through the clouds, evading British cruisers that had momentarily miscalculated her position. Lutyens sent a long radio message to German command, unaware that British direction-finding units intercepted it. For a brief, tense moment, it seemed the mighty battleship might escape the clutches of the Royal Navy and reach the safety of occupied France. But the Atlantic is a vast, unforgiving arena, and luck is a fleeting companion at sea. By May 26th, a RAF Catalina flying boat found Bismarck, bringing her fate sharply into focus. Fuel shortages forced some British ships to turn back, and the German crew dared a fragile optimism. Yet the ocean carried whispers of impending doom. Every movement was being monitored, every signal traced, and the carrier's deadly aircraft were ready to strike again. The tension among the German sailors grew unbearable, and for the first time, doubt began to creep into hardened hearts. HMS Ark Royal launched another wave of swordfish biplanes, this time into a tempest of wind, rain, and enemy fire. The first attack nearly ended in disaster when British pilots mistook the friendly HMS Sheffield for their target. Confusion and chaos reigned in the air, but the second strike, coordinated with grim precision, would seal Bismarck's doom. One torpedo found its mark on the stern, and instantly, the battleship's rudder jammed. The mighty ship, once a symbol of invincibility, began circling helplessly in the icy waters, a floating colossus trapped by her own limitations. Back on the British side, the excitement was tempered by exhaustion. Every sailor and aviator understood the stakes. The prize was enormous, yet the danger was equal. Plans were drawn, calculations made, and ships positioned to ensure the German vessel could not recover. In the midst of chaos, the human drama unfolded. Courage, fear, fatigue, and the primal will to survive battled silently alongside metal and fire. Please click subscribe and like the video. It helps more people see this incredible story. Throughout that day and night, Bismarck became a magnet for relentless pursuit. British destroyers harassed her, torpedoes flew through black waves, and every moment of respite for the German crew was brutally denied. The Atlantic became a stage of tension and endurance, with men on both sides knowing that the next hour might be their last. The great battleship, once feared for her power, was now fighting against the cold, exhaustion, and an enemy that refused to relent. And as dawn approached, it was clear. The chase had reached its crescendo. Bismarck was trapped, her fate intertwined with the strategy, skill, and determination of those who hunted her. The stage was set for a final, climactic confrontation that would etch the tale into naval history forever. By the evening of May 26th, the mighty Bismarck was crippled. Ruder Hamed steering impossible. She circled helplessly in the dark, storm-lashed Atlantic. Admiral Lutyens and Captain Lindemann knew the end was near, yet their resolve remained ironclad. Messages from the ship carried grim finality. Ship Unma Ubra. We shall fight to the last shell. The cold Atlantic waves slapped the hull, a reminder that nature itself was complicit in this final reckoning. Throughout the night, British and Polish destroyers kept a relentless vigil. Torpedoes cut through waves, searchlights danced across decks, and gunfire erupted intermittently, testing the limits of Bismarck's remaining strength. Fatigue gnawed at the German sailors, many of whom had been awake for days, battling fear, seasickness, and despair. Each attack seemed to bring them closer to the inevitable, yet no one aboard surrendered. The battle was no longer just about victory, it was about survival, honor, and bearing witness to history. Dawn broke on May 27th, and the final act commenced. The British battleships HMS Rodney and HMS King George V closed to point-blank range, their guns trained with deadly precision. Bismarck returned fire, but her defenses were crumbling. Turrets hammered, ammunition exploded prematurely, and her bridge was obliterated. Fires raged uncontrollably through the decks, smoke choking sailors and visibility alike. One by one, the great guns fell silent, and the floating fortress became a blazing tomb. Amidst the chaos, the human element of war shone tragically bright. Men worked desperately to save what they could, launching life rafts, tending to the wounded, and praying for a miracle. Yet the Atlantic was merciless. Hypothermia claimed the unprotected, injuries went untreated, and the silence between bursts of gunfire was filled with the sound of the sea swallowing those who had once been so proud. Scuttling charges were set by German crews, ensuring that their symbol of power would not be claimed intact by the enemy. As British ships withdrew to conserve fuel, HMS Dorsetshire delivered the final torpedoes, punching through the hull of the burning battleship. With a groaning, thunderous sound, Bismarck capsized and sank beneath the waves. Over 2,000 sailors perished. Just over 100 were rescued before U-boat warnings forced the British to leave. The Atlantic, cold and gray, became a graveyard for steel and men alike. The destruction of Bismarck was more than a tactical victory, it was a turning point in the Atlantic. German surface raiding ambitions were crushed, and British confidence in naval supremacy surged. The episode demonstrated a crucial evolution in naval warfare. Sheer size and armor no longer guaranteed dominance. Intelligence, reconnaissance, air power and coordination had proven decisive. Aircraft carriers and torpedo bombers now dictated the seas, signaling a new era in naval strategy that would shape the remainder of the war. Yet even in victory, the human cost was stark. Survivors recounted scenes of unimaginable terror, men clinging to floating debris, listening to the groan of a sinking ship, and watching friends disappear into icy waters. Across the Atlantic, the story of the Bismarck became legend, a tale of pride, power, hubris, and the relentless will of those who refused to yield. In the aftermath, the Royal Navy consolidated lessons from the engagement. Convoy routes were adjusted. Coordination between ships and aircraft intensified, and morale soared. German commanders, while mourning their lost crews, were forced to acknowledge a harsh truth. Surface battleships could no longer operate with impunity. The focus of the Kriegsmarine shifted to submarines, and the era of battleship dominance in the Atlantic was effectively over. The Atlantique, once a stage for the grandest and most audacious naval ambitions, returned to its timeless rhythm of waves and wind. Yet beneath the surface, the memory of Bismarck lingered, a monument to courage, tragedy, and the unforgiving nature of war. A chapter of history had closed, written not just in steel and fire, but in the blood, sweat, and endurance of the men who lived and died upon her decks. Even today, the sinking of Bismarck resonates as a symbol of the shifting tides of warfare, the limits of power, and the extraordinary courage of sailors caught in the vortex of history. For in the Atlantic's cold embrace, lessons were learned that would echo across every naval engagement for the rest of the Second World War and beyond.